Hey everyone, it's Satvik Alawalia, your host for the Progress Texas Happy Hour. Welcome. I'm joined by Progress Texas Advocacy Director Diana Gomez, Senior Strategist Glenn Smith, and President Ed Espinoza. This week we're covering a lot. The impact of the Virginia and New Jersey elections, local elections here in Texas, including in Austin and San Antonio. The 2022 elections, we want to talk about some of the polling around that. And then something big is happening on Monday. Candidate filing opens, and Diana will talk about that. But before we start, this is a happy hour. So what's everyone drinking today? I have got a Blue Moon Belgian White. It's not a Truly, but it's still pretty good. Diana, what are you drinking?
So I've diverged from the Truly routine
Oh, thank God.
and have gone for a red wine.
And this is all because Truly hasn't sponsored us yet. So if they want to keep
Yes.
that mentions up, sponsor us. Glenn, what
Bring
do
it
you
back.
got?
You know what? I'm drinking ice water today.
Mm.
I've amassed a considerable thirst, as they say, so I'm dousing it with water.
They do say that, and I'm glad
They
you said
do.
it too, because water
They
is
do.
life-giving. And Ed, what about you? What libations are you drinking today?
I am also drinking red wine today.
Ooh.
Look at that, Diana.
Same.
Same page. Cheers.
Truly a coincidence.
Yes.
It was
yes.
it's too cold for beer today.
Yeah.
It's like what's the temperature outside here? I think it's 55 degrees. It's not really cold beer weather.
Well, I'm from the north, and so it's always cold.
Ah.
Well, it's good. Everyone's getting hydrated or inebriated. Ed, let's talk about national elections. What are you seeing, or what did we see on Tuesday?
So, big
Oh, wow.
election in Virginia on Tuesday, governor's race, and Republicans won that race by, I think it was like 1 percentage point. And it was a tight race. I think that it's the race that everybody is talking about this week. And oh no, what does it mean for Democrats? And what does it mean for 2022? And the short answer is that it does mean that Democrats should think about their agenda and their messaging heading into 2022. But what it also means is that the party that wins the Virginia governor's race is almost always the opposite party of who has won the presidential race the year before, especially in the first year of a president's office. In fact, if you go back 40 years, I looked this up earlier today, if you go back 40 years, every president in their first term has had an opposite party governor in Virginia in their first term. So it's a trend, but it's also one that kind of is a sign for 2022, because remember, Biden did win Virginia by 10 points. So even if McAuliffe would have won Virginia, the fact that it was such a tight race would have still been a reason for us to pay close attention to it and kind of read the tea leaves as to what it means for next year.
Yeah, let me add to that. I think we could also note that the party in power in the White House always loses the New Jersey governor's race a year after as well, and we didn't this time, although
Right.
It was very, very close. I mean, what is the most predictable part of all this is a lot of hot takes from national pundits who want to ring alarms and pretend to be giving deep analysis. Ed, you just noted for 40 years this has been a phenomenon. So how could a guy that's been covering national politics for a long time be surprised at the results? It was probably the most predictable outcome we've had in several years. So the surprise is kind of feigned, and there is cause for us to knuckle down, get with it, design the message, deliver the message in 2022, but there's no reason to ring the alarm bells in panic.
Yeah.
Well, that's good, because I did feel like panicking that night, but then talking to Ed and yourself and hearing some of the stuff, and actually, what was missed a little bit is at local levels across the country, Democrats actually did pretty good. Like, I'm from Boston. Michelle Wu won the mayorship. She's the first woman of color. She's the first, actually, yeah, I think she's the first woman of color in like 70 years or 100 years to, or maybe even ever. But so there are bright spots on what happened on Tuesday.
Yeah, and I actually want to talk a little bit more about Virginia. There are some bright spots around the country, but there's a lot to unpack here. So let me dive in for a second. One, there are some campaign fundamentals that are really important to observe in this race. And one of those fundamentals that Glenn has seen this before. Matter of fact, I think, Glenn, you experienced it on one of Ann Richards' races. It is do not have an unforced error in the last stretch of the campaign. And in this case, Terry McAuliffe had an unforced error. He was talking about some issues in a debate, and he came out with a line that was something along the lines of parents should not be involved in education. It was a gaffe that he had an opportunity to correct, and instead of correcting it, he doubled down on it. So what happened there? Well, Biden, who had won college-educated women by 15 points the year before, suddenly, Biden had won college-educated women by 1 point. Terry McAuliffe lost them by 15 points. When it came to non-college educated women, Terry McAuliffe lost them 3-1. So if you say you don't want parents involved in education, it shouldn't be surprised that you're going to lose moms when it comes to election day. So that is one thing, one gaffe that McAuliffe made. The other one is that Youngkin, the Republican, kept Trump a far away from this race. He specifically asked Trump not to appear in Virginia, don't go on TV, don't have rallies, keep your distance. That's going to be hard for Republicans to replicate in 2022 because Trump plays an outsized role in primaries. He has a looming presence. Candidates want him there. It's not like Virginia. So having said that, with Terry McAuliffe's gaffe and Youngkin's strategy to keep Trump at bay, those aren't really two things that are easily repeated in other races. And remember that with those two things, the race was still a 1-point race. It could have gone the other way at the last minute.
Yeah, let me go ahead and tell one of the gaffe stories that you referred to, Ed. In fact, Ann Richards was involved in 90. She won because of one, and in 94, it's possible to say she lost because of her own gaffe. But the one in 90 was from Clayton Williams, the Republican nominee. Get this picture. He invited the press to go camping on his ranch. He wanted to show off his sort of Western bona fides and his cowboy persona. All he had was the press there. Sitting there with the press, he managed to tell this terrible misogynistic joke that rape is like the weather. You just need to sit back and enjoy it. Now, that wasn't from the stump in a debate. He actually had called the press there to tell them funny things like that, right? That really hurt him. And in fact, it led to several more gaffes just because of his nervousness for that one. In 94, Ann Richards got frustrated and called in a kind of visually mean-spirited way, called George W. Bush a jerk. It was very ungracious, and it hurt her, and she had a hard time recovering from it. There were other, as Ed mentioned in Virginia, there were other circumstances to the race. But let me tell you something, campaigns are no place for improvisational work. You need to get to your message and stick to your message and quit thinking that you're smarter than your audience, because when you try that, you're usually not.
Imagine that being the worst thing in a campaign today, calling somebody a jerk. It's like a love tap in 2021.
That's a really good point. At the time, it got a lot of attention, though. And I guess you had to see it visually to get, because she meant it. I mean, she was really mad, and it got played over and over and over anyway.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned, Ed, that Youngkin did a good job of keeping Trump at bay, but that Republicans moving forward might have a rough time replicating that. I also wonder if they will also try to replicate that sweater vest he apparently wore everywhere on his campaign trail.
Maybe
it was just
had a
an
very
interesting
Mr.
fashion
Rogers kind of
statement.
feel to it.
You know, one thing I'm curious about is, have the Republicans come out to say that there was voter fraud in either Virginia, in Virginia?
No.
Oh, wow. That's a surprise.
There is some
talk they win, Sophic.
Right. Oh, you're right. They, okay. Makes sense.
There is some talk of that in New Jersey, however.
Of course.
I don't know if
that
they've
makes sense too.
Right.
Wonderful.
One last thing on this topic before we move forward to the next one, but Glenn mentioned we won Democrats won New Jersey, which was actually outside of the pattern of, not only does the party who holds the White House lose the Virginia governor's race, they typically lose the New Jersey governor's race. They won it this time. It was very close. It is a message that Democrats should heed, that it was that close, because New Jersey is a state that's considered a blue wall state. I think Virginia can be considered a blue wall state some years. It's more of a blue swing state at this point. But New Jersey being that close is a signal that should be acknowledged.
Just to add one point on that, Ed, so I'm from Massachusetts, and it's like very often in Mass that like you have a mostly blue legislator and like congressional delegation and Senate delegation, but then you have a Republican governor. And I wonder if like, it's just like a quirk of like these New England Northeast states where it's like they just want to have some sort of balance, so to speak, versus some other kind of trend. I guess we'll find out next year. So obviously, the national elections or like the bigger statewide elections across the state, across the nation, took up a lot of oxygen. But we actually had some really cool elections right here in Texas. Diana, you were one of the leaders here in Austin of Prop A. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, definitely. And, it was not just me. I feel like I played a super tiny part in a really amazing team of, I believe it was, one of the most diverse coalitions ever. So it was an amazing win to see on Tuesday night. And it was one of the amazing wins, too, across the nation, just to bring it back one more time to nationwide perspective. I'd also read, too, that it was for the first time in history, I believe we have over 1,000 elected LGBTQ folks across the nation that were elected on Tuesday night.
Wow.
So, we saw, really great successes that night, too, that people should be reminded of. But yes, quickly for folks who don't know a lot about what Prop A was, in Texas, it was an unfunded mandate that would have forced the city of Austin to spend hundreds of millions more on the police department, but by cutting essential services from like our fire department, EMS workers, mental health care workers, libraries, parks, it would have meant a lot of jobs would have been at risk. And if we're talking about safety and what keeps a community safe, it's about keeping that money in our resources, in our fire departments. And so it was really amazing to see. I believe it won by close to 69%.
Yeah, it was 2-1.
Here in Travis County. Yeah. So an early vote was amazing. I think we could tell by the early voting numbers that it had won. So that was a really great win to see diverse people coming together and declaring that they knew our city was safe.
That wasn't the only big race in Texas. Ed, you were talking earlier about. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I want to talk a little more about Prop A, actually, to add to this, because Diana really brought up a very important point, was that we have spending measures on the ballot all the time. The difference is that those are tax rate elections. When you're approving a spending measure, you're approving an incremental tax, usually a property tax, and the voters have a chance to approve it. So we saw that last year when they approved the new rail system that will be coming to Austin in a decade. But planning ahead, we're always planning ahead.
One day.
Yeah.
But this particular police initiative was not that. And it was layered on top of the city of Austin giving all of the money back to the police department that it had taken out in the previous year's budget. Not only did it restore all funding, it increased funding by $10 million. So not only were police fully staffed again, I saw a question in the comments asking about the plan to fully staff police. Well, they've been fully funded once again with an additional $10 million. But this particular proposal would have meant taking money from the next biggest pots of the budget, which were firefighters, EMS, health services, parks and libraries were in there too, but they're such a small piece of that budget. I think what was important here was that this was kind of an answer to defund the police, where the pendulum swung way too far to the right, and any potential crossover votes that were there didn't fall for it. In fact, Republican turnout was suppressed. Something about Republicans not being on board for spending measures. Who would have known? Who would have saw that coming?
And I think something super important to note here as well is that there was a law passed in the state ledge that made it so that whatever sort of funding that was approved in a city, you had to sort of like stay at that every year, and you couldn't go down from it. And so if this would have been approved, it would have been millions of dollars, jobs cut, not just this year, but every year after that. So it was really great win that it didn't pass.
Good win, bad policy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, it was hard to take it as policy proposal seriously. It was just more like a propaganda talking point that they turned into a referendum to put on the ballot. It was, you know, if you looked at it, it was just hard to take it seriously. And I think that might have had an impact on some Republican voters who didn't show up too. It was kind of, gosh, you could talk about this, but to try to turn it into policy is a bridge too far.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so out there that even the chief of police said that it didn't use the intelligence when coming up with the proposal. He was like, this makes no sense. And so when you have like the chief of police saying that, well, he would be the one getting the money. And he's like, no, this is dumb.
Yeah.
Excellent point.
Yeah. And of course, fire, EMS, everyone came out against it. And it turned out that Austin was against it too. Thank God.
Yeah, by a lot.
Ed, I wanted to ask you about the race in, and if I pronounce this incorrectly, I apologize to everyone who lives in Bexar County.
It's Bexar County.
Bexar County. I'm not used to the silent X.
For you. It's been a special election in Bexar County. I hesitate to say San Antonio because I think there are no parts of San Antonio that are in this particular district. This district is shaped kind of like a croissant at the bottom of the county that goes around Bexar County. I don't know why I picked croissant. I should have probably picked like a better like a chili pepper, a jalapeno probably is what it's shaped like. But it is a Democratic district. It's a district that Biden won by 14 points. On election day, a Republican was elected to this seat. He won by the skin of his teeth, less than 300 votes out of a total of 11,000 cast. It was good for 11%. It was 11% turnout in the special election. A Republican won it. I should mention it's the 8th time this Republican has appeared on this ballot. He has served in this seat before. He also won it previously in a very low turnout special election, and now he's done it again. But this will be this seat, House District 118, State Representative, House District 118, has been gerrymandered, and it was a Biden 14-point win for Biden there last year, but in the newly drawn district, Biden would have only won it by 3 points. So that becomes a swing district now. It was a swing district going in, drawn to be a swing district. It's going to be one next year. So that will be one to keep an eye on. What's really interesting about this is that low turnout is what cost Democrats the election here. You had a young candidate who was qualified and well-known, ran a good campaign, came very close. Like I said, was within 300 votes out of more than 11,000 cast. But low turnout won the day, and Republicans outspent Democrats 2-1 in this race. And when you're dealing with numbers that small, I mean, 2-1 is always big. You saw it with Prop A. Prop A won 2-1 in Austin. Well, the Republican was outspent the Democrat 2-1 in Bexar County, and had a narrow margin, narrow victory because of it.
Yeah, and the Republican that won is I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce his name correctly. Lujan. I keep wanting to say Lujan, like he's French or something. But beat an amazing Democratic candidate, Frank Ramirez. And I'm not sure if you mentioned this before, Ed, but I believe there's it's not a total loss, right? Isn't there a chance that Lujan might not even serve? Is there a chance to take that seat away before the next legislative session?
So it's an interesting point you bring up. Lujan once won this seat years ago in a special election in early 2016. He was in January of 2016. He was defeated in November of 2016. So he served as a legislator but never while the legislature was in session. He has once again been elected in November of 2021. He will be up again in November of 2022. Unless we have a special called legislative session next year, he will have served 2 terms in the legislature, having never taken a vote, but also having never missed a vote because there was never a session. I hope he's really good at constituent service, because that's like the only thing there's left to do.
This is a heck of a way for, go ahead, Diane, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that seems like an honor worth being put in a really sad Hall of Fame.
It's like a heck of a way for a guy to try to aggregate his retirement, isn't it? Like he just runs in a special election and then he's gone in the general election and he runs in a special election. I think we have our candidate in 2022 in that district. You got to get a pledge that he won't leave the office after winning for several cycles.
It's a pretty good grift, you know.
You only need 7 years to be vested in the state retirement program, so Lujan is chipping away at it.
He's got a head start.
Well, so, you know, everyone watching and listening, the reason we talk about these elections at the national and local level is that people want to read into the tea leaves what will happen in 2022, which is a big midterm election. A lot of statewide races will be decided next November. Glenn, you were recently on Fox talking about a poll that came out about Greg Abbott and Beto O'Rourke. What did the poll say, and what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think the most notable feature of that poll was that Greg Abbott continued to be in the low 40s in his approval rating, right, in the horse race. And that's that's very telling. He's not bouncing up at all in any of these polls. I guess in a minute we'll come around and talk about reasons for that. We also need to note that Beto was 1 point behind, already at 42. So you can tell Beto at 42, Abbott at 43. This whole race now is going to take place over the 8 points that separate him from 50 plus 1%, right? Who gets that? Who gets there first? I think it's a heck of an opportunity. I don't want to read an awful lot into an early poll like this, and I'm always afraid that I'll crow about polling results for my candidate this many months away, and then in 2 weeks there'll be a terrible one. I'll have to discount polling altogether, so I'll seem rather silly. But it is important to note Abbott's continued appearance in the low 40s in poll after poll after poll. That gives us reason to believe that may really be where he is, and he may struggle to do better.
Yeah, and producer Chris posted a question in the comments here about how does Abbott see Youngkin from Virginia? How does he see Youngkin's dodge of Trump, given Abbott's fringe opponents in his primary? And I think that it plays out a little differently here. I think Abbott embraces Trump. He runs to Trump because Abbott's tendencies are always to run to the right and try to consolidate that Republican base, because that's a playbook that has worked for Texas for so many years. The problem now, and we saw this in the Progress Texas poll that we did back in February, which, by the way, Abbott was at 44% back then, is that he has been losing independents by double digits. I think he's losing independents by 20 points right now. That is a new development for Republicans, and it hasn't gotten any better over the past year. You've seen it with like permitless carry, with the strictest abortion laws in the country, all these things that are driving people away from the Republican Party. And he's really going to be stuck at 44%. In Abbott's mind, he may need Trump more than Youngkin didn't need Trump, because that's just the way the landscape looks a little different here. But it creates a tremendous opportunity for whoever may run for governor. I almost said his name. Can I just say his name I guess we've already talked about it. I mean, it's going to create a tremendous opportunity for Beto,
or Matthew McConaughey, or
Matthew McConaughey, right? God help us.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, Ed. I feel like Abbott and the rest of the GOP have definitely dug themselves into a really big hole that we're not sure if they'll be able to get out of, because, it's not just about, who's going to announce, which we are eagerly awaiting that any day now. But, supply chain issues are affecting our Democratic candidates, obviously. But also that a lot of folks have really been motivated enough to where Republicans are saying, did we go too far? which obviously, yes. So a lot of
Yes.
people will be turning out to vote anti-Abbott. So enraged by the rights that have been taken away. A lot of people really motivated by, by beating Abbott that are just going to turn out next year, especially because of the issues you mentioned with like the most restrictive abortion ban in the whole country that's now, reaching Supreme Court levels. A lot of folks are really fired up and want to take our state back.
Yeah, I think I wanted to talk just a minute about Abbott's vulnerabilities and why he seems stuck in the low 40s. I think one of those reasons that sometimes we don't remember to like add up are all of his failures on COVID, on the electric grid, on the care of foster children, on education generally, on healthcare generally, again on COVID, and most recently, did you see his big like border PR campaign where they arrested a bunch of immigrants on trespassing charges, and they're having to let them all go because they didn't say where they'd been trespassing, whose property they were trespassing on. So even that stunt failed Abbott. And I think that's one reason I think people see that. I think there's another reason, a little bit more abstract, but I think it's important. Abbott saw Trump play the strong man and get a lot of support for being the tough, kind of Mussolini-like, square-jawed straw man. Abbott is not that. So when he tried to assume that character, it looks phony. It's kind of a lesson for new candidates to me. You can't so fake a character that you're not, because voters see through it. And to some degree, voters see that Abbott is not Trump. I mean, he may try to behave like him, but character-wise, he doesn't have it in him. That's not him, and it shows. And I think that also hurts him.
I think, can we talk a little bit about sort of what messaging may help Democrats here heading into 2022? Because clearly Democrats may have the White House, the Congress, the Senate, but still find themselves in a defensive position, right? And I guess naturally, if you're the party of power, you are defending. But the issue here is that at the national level, Democrats run everything, but they don't really have anything to show for it right now. And part of that is the holdup that we're having with Manchin and Sinema. And I realize that there are a lot of things we want in this package. There's so many more things that we could get if we had two better Democrats in those positions. Is it time for Democrats to just fish and cut bait, take what we can get, show the accomplishment, and then move on to the next thing? Or do Democrats need to keep fighting with Sinema and Manchin to try and squeeze more out of this? Because I think that that's going to be a narrative that starts to thread through the 2022 election cycle.
So I went on a Twitter rampage yesterday about this exact question. There actually are things Democrats should be talking about. Child poverty is like at record low rates because Biden expanded the child tax credit, right? And I was thinking about, I had an annual review with you in April, Ed, right? And what I didn't do is say, Diana's bad. I told you what I did for I wasn't talking about Diana.
Or
who I
did
love.
you?
I don't know.
What?
Well, the point being, though, in my review with you, aka re-election, I talked about how I added to Progress Texas, what my plans for the future were, and I was like, Ed, look at all the good things I did. But Democrats don't seem to be doing that. They're talking about Trump, who's not running in an election right now, and they're like avoiding all the good things that they have done. And what that leaves you with is like, well, what have they done then? Because they're not saying it. And they're basically pitching themselves for their annual review, and they're not really pitching themselves on anything because they're talking about someone else who's not them. And so I think it just doesn't add up because we have things to talk about. We're just not doing it.
A couple of years ago, I saw a fella named Rashad Robinson, who's the head of a group called Color of Change. And he said something that really struck me. And I've kept this saying for a long time in the back of my mind. And that message was, just because people hate the other guy doesn't mean they're going to love you. And I think that's so important, especially for progressives, because, we talk about George Lakoff a lot here at Progress Texas and his theory of message framing and emotional messages and stuff. But one of the things that Lakoff also talks about is how conservatives and progressives are wired differently, right? Conservatives tend to have a worldview that's based around fear, sometimes anger, and they respond to that. And I think that progressives tend to be a little bit more hopey, changey, which is why that message works so much better on progressives. So we have a higher barrier for our own voters in that going negative works, but it doesn't go as far for our voters as it might go for conservative voters, which means you have to pair that with a go negative. And what is your counter vision to that? It's not to take anything away from anybody. It's not to armchair quarterback anything that happened in Virginia or anywhere else. I just think that it's an important principle for people to keep in mind going forward, that you can go negative. People don't like it, but it works. But for progressives, you got to do a little bit more. You got to say what you're for as well.
Absolutely. And we have the other problem here in our races in Texas in 2022. Well, it always has been one for the last couple of decades anyway. Our elections are no longer local, right? They're nationalized. So we have people having to run for local, say, state representative or other local office in an election essentially driven by the cable networks, right, in the national media. It's like I'm tempted to say our candidate should put a message team together that sits in a closet and never watches MSNBC, CNN, or Fox.
It goes on Twitter.
So they don't fall prey to reacting to what they're seeing come out of nationally, right? Instead, do their own research, brag about their own accomplishments locally, etc. It's something we got to pay attention to this year, like usually.
Yep.
So we're talking about candidates, and maybe there's other candidates running for governor, for all the other positions. Then a really important date in respect to candidates is coming up soon. Can you fill us in on what's going on?
Yes, after what seems like 20 legislative sessions in 1 year, or something close to that number, we're going straight. We're going straight from that into campaign season. And like I said before, supply chain issues when it comes to folks announcing running for office. But thank God we have deadlines, because a lot of people, especially procrastinators, we need deadlines, including myself. Not as a candidate, as a procrastinator.
Or maybe a candidate.
We'll see. But next week is when the filing opens for running for office, and then it'll end, in December, I believe, in the second week of December. But folks should be on the lookout to finally have that supply chain arrive and see who we have running for office. And it's next week, so there is still time to encourage, and I know we've released a statement on this along with Annie's list, more women to run for office, especially women of color to run for office. Here at Progress, we really believe that the people who represent Texas should really reflect the residents inside of the state. And Texas values are progressive values, so those candidates should also have those progressive values to go along with them. I'm seeing a question in the comments by Susana Ledesma Woody. What would you like to hear your thoughts on Republicans running as Democrats? So, just like I said, we want more candidates to run, more diverse candidates who are true progressives, who really reflect our values. And so super excited to see who throws their names in the mix and to see how spicy it starts to get at the end of this year.
And as far as like former Republicans go, like there are people who have seen the light and have come around, and so long as they are true to their values, to their progressive values, I think that's the reason we have these primaries and all of these forums and such, is to really kind of test those waters. But if it's somebody that's just seeing an opportunity and is a wolf in sheep's clothing, I mean, obviously that's inauthentic. Hopefully voters see through that and respond accordingly. But the good news is it's filing period, and it will hopefully see more candidates file. And in the words of Duke Ellington, I don't need more time, I need a deadline. And that's what this candidate filing period is going to give people.
So, like, candidate filing is my favorite part of the election cycle, because it's kind of like when you go into a movie and before the film starts, like, there's the trailers. And the trailers are all the best parts, right?
Yes!
You don't know what's going to happen. But then when the movie could be really bad, it could be really good. And like, you don't know what's going to happen, but the trailers are always awesome. So this is like the trailers for the campaign, and I'm just so excited to see what happens.
I want every candidate to announce.
Who knows?
Every candidate to announce and say, "In a world."
In a world.
Yeah.
In a world where Diana's a congresswoman. You'll have health care. Just kidding, Diana's not running, I don't think.
Coming in 2080.
Whoa. So there's a hope.
By the way, can we just talk about like how early this filing deadline is? It's one thing that really I really don't like about Texas elections is that our primary is one of the earliest in America. I think Illinois is the only one that happens as early as ours. And maybe, Glenn, maybe you can add some insights as to why we do this so early. But the fact that candidate filing and the deadline, when candidate filing closes, is in the calendar year before the next election seems very much like that makes this an insider's game. And most people may not even think about elections or maybe running for these offices until the next year, but by next year it's too late. Even January is too late. Like why does it have to be this way, Glenn?
I suspect it was a conspiracy from the Capitol Press Corps, and here's why. In the old days, the filing deadline happened right smack dab in the middle of the Christmas holidays, the Christmas New Year's holidays. So reporters couldn't take that time off. The primary was later in the year, so the filing deadline was later. So I could just see reporters getting together in a smoke-filled room and saying, you know what, we want our Christmas holiday back. Let's put the filing deadline in early December. Of course, I'm making that up. The real reason is to squeeze the time for challengers to incumbents. So it's the incumbent legislators set the dates, and they wanted to narrow the amount of time somebody had to challenge them, and that's what we got in a primary, and that's what we got.
Glenn, your story is more believable than actually, what's happening in Dallas, where they thought JFK was going to show up, do a rally, announce to be VP for Donald Trump 2024. Like, that is a weird conspiracy. Yours is like relatively plausible. Like, people should people should try and make their jobs easier. So if the Capitol Press did that, I don't hate it. It's like, yeah, enjoy the vacation with your family. Do it.
Wasn't it amazing that somebody didn't put on a JFK Jr. mask and suit and show up?
Well,
I don't know if you saw the thing that the Onion put up, and they said that crowds of QAnon supporters disappointed that the only person who showed up was the crocodile hunter.
Oh my God.
Steve Irwin, ladies and gentlemen.
Well,
all right, we had time.
Thanks for that. That's a great lead-in. That's a great lead-in, Ed. Dana, Glenn, Ed, as always, thanks for lending your expertise. To everyone who's watching and listening, thanks for joining us. Head over to www.progresstexas.org and follow us on social media, subscribe to our email list. If you're listening to us on a podcast, subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app and leave a review so other folks can find out about the best political podcast in Texas. Everyone else, have a good weekend. See you next week. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks.